My name is Stella. I am 33 years old, and I spent the last decade building my husband an empire while shrinking myself to fit into my mother's definition of a good daughter. Last Tuesday, my stepsister walked into my divorce mediation wearing my stolen wedding ring. She threw an ultrasound photo onto the mahogany table and smiled. She said she would take much better care of my husband than I ever did. I just stared at the $50 bill she slid across the table for my bus fare. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your kindness mistaken for weakness by the people who should have protected you. The conference room at the downtown law firm was freezing. The walls were made of thick glass, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. I sat on one side of the heavy mahogany table. Across from me sat the three people who had actively conspired to ruin my life. Carter, my husband of 7 years, wore his custom Italian suit. He leaned back in his leather chair with the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. Next to him sat Madison, my 30-year-old stepsister. She kept resting her left hand on the table, making sure the overhead lights caught the diamond of the engagement ring Carter had purchased using our joint savings account. The same ring that went missing from my jewelry box 2 months ago. And then there was Diana, my biological mother. She sat perfectly rigid, her posture impeccable, acting as the ultimate mediator for her golden child's theft. No one spoke for a long minute. The silence was meant to intimidate me. Carter finally leaned forward and tapped his gold pen against a stack of legal documents. He demanded absolutely everything from me. He wanted full ownership of the marital home we had renovated together. He wanted my 50% equity in his financial consulting firm. The firm I built from the ground up using my skills as a forensic accountant. Madison picked up a glossy photograph and tossed it across the polished wood. It landed right in front of me, an ultrasound photo, the grainy black and white image of a tiny fetus. Madison smiled a vicious, triumphant smirk that I had seen 1,000 times since childhood, when she stole my favorite dresses, when she broke my science fair projects, when she took credit for my ideas. She crossed her legs and let out a soft sigh. You have to understand, Stella. Carter needs a real family. He needs an heir for his legacy. You have failed to give him that. It is time for you to gracefully step aside. I looked down at the ultrasound. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream. As a forensic accountant, my entire career revolves around looking at the data, analyzing the facts, and waiting for the right moment to present the undeniable truth. Carter picked up the narrative, his voice dripping with condescension. You are a smart woman, Stella. You know how messy litigations can get. If you fight me on this, I will drag this divorce out for years. I will bleed your accounts dry in legal fees. Just sign over the house and the consulting firm equity. You can keep your little retirement account. Diana cleared her throat. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a prepared renunciation document. She slid it across the table toward me. It detailed the immediate transfer of all my marital assets directly to Carter. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as an obstacle in the way of Madison's happiness. Diana folded her hands on the table. She used the exact same psychological warfare she had employed since I was a little girl. She used repetition. Her voice was sharp and rhythmic. Family sacrifices. You are selfish. Family sacrifices. You cannot give him a child, so step aside. A good sister would recognize her own failures. Family sacrifices. You must sign the paper, Stella. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. I remembered all the times I wore Madison's old clothes while Diana bought Madison brand new designer outfits. I remembered Diana telling me my accounting degree was boring while she praised Madison for dropping out of fashion school. I took a deep breath. I looked at Carter. I looked at Madison. I looked at Diana. I picked up the gold pen resting on the table. I did not hesitate. I did not argue. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name on the renunciation document. I signed over the marital house. I signed over my entire 50% equity in the financial consulting firm. I pushed the papers back across the mahogany table. Carter smirked at me in absolute triumph. He snatched the documents, eagerly checking my signature. He thought he had completely ruined me. Madison giggled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Diana offered me a tight, approving nod. Suddenly, the heavy conference room door swung open. My attorney, who had been waiting quietly in the hallway, stepped inside. Two men in dark suits followed close behind him. They wore federal badges clipped to their belts. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Carter frowned, half rising from his leather chair. "What exactly is the meaning of this?" The lead federal agent stepped forward. "Carter Wilson, you are coming with us." By signing that renunciation document, I had legally removed my name from the consulting firm. That transferred equity officially tied Carter directly to a massive federal money laundering operation I had secretly uncovered weeks ago. Carter stared right at me in absolute shock and then dropped his heavy gold pen. The federal agents escorted Carter out of the law firm in handcuffs. He looked pathetic. His custom Italian suit wrinkled as they shoved him into the back of an unmarked sedan. I watched from the 12th floor window. A forensic accountant knows exactly how fast financial crimes catch up to arrogant men. My phone buzzed before Carter even reached the federal building. It was an automated alert from my banking software. Diana had just wired $200,000 to a bail bondsman. She drained her emergency savings account to keep him out of a jail cell. I closed my laptop and took a sip of cold coffee. I expected nothing less from her. The very next morning, the glass doors of my downtown accounting firm swung open with a violent crash. Diana marched past the receptionist. Her face was flushed dark red with rage. She wore a pristine Chanel trench coat and carried a matching leather handbag. She stormed directly into my private office and slammed the door behind her. The heavy glass rattled in its frame. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are trying to destroy this family," she screamed. Her voice echoed through the thin office walls. I sat perfectly still behind my desk. I kept my hands folded over my legal pad. "You set Carter up. You knew the feds were watching that firm. You handed it over just to watch him burn." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. "You are defending a man who stole millions and slept with your stepdaughter." Diana slammed both hands onto my desk. "Carter made a mistake. Madison is carrying his child. Family sacrifices. You must protect the family. Family sacrifices. You are a bitter, barren woman who cannot stand to see her sister happy. If you do not call the federal prosecutor and recant your financial analysis, I will ruin you. I will call every business journal in Chicago. I will tell them you fabricated the audit out of pure jealousy. I will write articles detailing your mental instability. You will never work as an accountant in this city again." I let her rant, her face twisted into a mask of pure resentment. "You have always done this, Stella. You have always tried to ruin everything for Madison, just like when you were teenagers. You could never accept your place. You threw a tantrum when I bought Madison that Prada graduation dress. You acted like such a victim just because you had to wear Madison's old prom dress. You always wanted what she had. You are a stain on this family. You always ruin her joy." The memories hit me like physical blows, but I refused to let her see me bleed. I remembered the stained dresses. I remembered the oversized shoes. I remembered watching Diana take Madison on luxury shopping sprees while I stayed home to balance the household checkbook. Diana spent my college fund on Madison's Sweet 16 party. She told me I was smart enough to get loans. Madison needed the investment. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my top desk drawer. I pulled out a military-grade encrypted hard drive. It contained every single financial record, offshore account, routing number, and hidden asset Carter thought he had deleted. I slipped the drive into my structured leather briefcase. I zipped it shut with a sharp sound. Diana blinked her rant, suddenly pausing. "What are you doing?" "I told you to call the prosecutor. I told you to fix this." I walked around the desk. I stopped inches from her face. "You bailed out a sinking ship, Diana. Carter is going to prison, And when the IRS audits his accounts, they are going to audit yours. I stepped around her and opened my office door. I walked past the staring receptionist and headed straight for the elevator. Diana ran into the hallway screaming my name. Stella, you come back here. You will pay for this. I stepped into the elevator and hit the lobby button. The doors slid shut. The war had officially begun. I drove straight to a retro diner on the edge of the city. Rain lashed against the windshield, but my mind was perfectly clear. I walked into the diner. The smell of cheap coffee and fried food filled the air. Grace sat in a corner booth. My biological sister looked up and waved. Next to her sat David. My brother-in-law was a towering African-American man with a background in health insurance fraud investigation. He took a sip of black coffee as I slid into the booth across from them. Grace grabbed my hand across the sticky table. Are you okay? I heard Carter got detained. I nodded. Diana bailed him out. She threatened to ruin my career if I do not drop the financial evidence against him. David scoffed. He reached into his dark jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He tossed the medical dossier onto the center of the table. The thud made the coffee cups rattle. Do not worry about Diana's threats, David said. His voice was low and steady. Carter has much bigger problems right now, and so does your precious stepsister. I looked down at the dossier. I opened the cover. Inside was a printed background check and a state registry report. David tapped the paper with his index finger. I ran the clinic registry number printed on that ultrasound photo Madison shoved in your face. I checked it against the state medical board database. I scanned the highlighted text. My heart hammered heavily against my ribs. David leaned forward, his dark eyes locked onto mine. That clinic was raided by the FBI and shut down by the state medical board 3 years ago. They were running a massive prescription fraud ring. The building is currently an abandoned lot. The ultrasound is completely fake. Madison is not pregnant. I left the diner with my heart pounding. I grabbed my car keys and walked into the pouring rain. I needed to stand on the exact physical ground where Madison claimed to have seen her unborn child. I typed the address from the ultrasound printout into my GPS. It guided me toward the industrial outskirts of the city. The rain slammed against my windshield as I pulled into a cracked asphalt parking lot. I put the car in park and stared through the glass. David was absolutely right. The address did not belong to a maternity clinic. It belonged to an abandoned strip mall. The windows were boarded up with rotting plywood. Weeds pushed through the shattered concrete. A faded sign hung by a rusty bolt above the main door. It advertised a discount dental office closed for a decade. I pulled out my phone and took 50 high-resolution photographs. I captured the desolate surroundings. Madison had downloaded a generic ultrasound template from the internet. She had typed a random address onto the header to make it look official. Pure, icy calculation took its place. I wiped my face and drove straight to the affluent suburbs. I pulled onto the cobblestone driveway of Diana's sprawling estate. Madison was standing near the massive iron front doors. She was holding 4 shopping bags from luxury boutiques. Carter's money was hard at work. I stepped out of my car and walked directly toward her. She shifted her shopping bags to one hand and placed her other hand protectively over her perfectly flat stomach. She was still playing the glowing mother-to-be. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Madison said. I stopped 2 feet away from her. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the photo gallery and shoved the screen in front of her face. I showed her the boarded-up windows of her supposed medical clinic. I showed her the cracked asphalt. You missed your appointment, Madison. I kept my voice completely flat. The clinic looks a little dusty today. Madison stared at the bright screen. I waited for the panic to set in. I waited for her to stammer or cry or beg me to keep her secret. She did none of those things. Madison threw her head back and let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She dropped her shopping bags onto the wet cobblestones. Her innocent facade evaporated instantly. You actually drove all the way out there in the rain, Madison sneered. Of course the clinic is fake. I am not pregnant. I have never been pregnant. I stared at her in genuine shock. She was admitting it without a single ounce of shame. "You are lying to Carter to steal his assets," I said. "You are committing systemic fraud." Madison smiled, a cold, dead expression that made my blood run cold. "Carter is going to prison, Stella. They will freeze everything. I need him to marry me before the indictments come down. I need my name on his offshore accounts. The baby is just leverage. It is a biological insurance policy to make sure he transfers the funds to me today." I gripped my phone tighter. "I will show Carter these photos. I will expose your lies." Madison did not flinch. She took another step forward. She was practically chest to chest with me. She reached up and grabbed my wrist with terrifying strength. She yanked my arm upward and forced my hand against her own cheek. Her nails dug deeply into my skin. "If you say one word to Carter, I will scream," Madison whispered. Her voice was pure venom. "I will throw myself onto these cobblestones. I will smash my own face against the bricks. I will tell the police that my barren, jealous stepsister attacked me. I will tell them you kicked me in the stomach to kill my baby." I tried to pull my arm away. Her grip was like a steel vise. "You are psychotic," I said. Madison smiled brightly. "I am smart. Who do you think the police will believe, Stella? The bitter divorced ex-wife with a vendetta, or the terrified pregnant woman bleeding on the driveway? They will always believe the pregnant girl." The heavy oak front door suddenly swung open. The sudden noise made Madison drop my wrist instantly. She stepped back and smoothed down her designer blouse. Diana walked out onto the porch. She held a stack of glossy catering menus in her hands. She did not notice the tension. She looked directly at me with her signature expression of absolute disdain. "Stella, you are finally here," Diana announced. She marched down the porch steps and shoved a menu into my hands. "We have an event to plan. Carter's assets are tied up. We need to secure liquid capital immediately." I looked at the menu. It was for a lavish country club gala. "I am throwing a gender reveal party for Madison this Saturday," Diana declared. She tapped a manicured finger against the expensive cardstock. "I have invited Carter's top 20 investors. They are all billionaires. They love family values. A new baby is the perfect emotional hook. We are going to use this gender reveal to secure $2 million in emergency funding to save Carter's hedge fund." Diana stepped closer and lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "You will attend this gala. You will wear a nice dress. You will smile, and you will make a public toast blessing their union. If you refuse, I will call the bank and freeze your grandfather's inheritance trust forever. You will be completely penniless." Diana turned on her heel and marched back into the mansion. Madison gave me one last victorious smirk before gathering her shopping bags and following her mother inside. They actually thought they had trapped me. I looked down at the glossy catering menu in my hands. They had absolutely no idea what I was about to do. The heavy doors of the country club swung open on Saturday night. I stepped into the glittering ballroom wearing a pristine white silk dress. The gown was flawless and elegant. The room buzzed with the measured voices of elite investors. Waiters in black tuxedos drifted through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Across the room, Carter worked the floor with desperate charisma. He paraded Madison around the wealthy guests, pointing to her fake baby bump. Madison wore a tight pink dress designed to emphasize her deception. She laughed loudly, playing the radiant mother to manipulate the wealthy elite perfectly. Diana materialized from the crowd wearing a dark emerald evening gown. Her manicured fingers wrapped around my forearm like a steel vise. She pulled me aggressively into a secluded alcove near the staircase. Diana glared down at me with absolute fury. "The investors are incredibly hesitant tonight," she hissed. "They need a public display of absolute family unity right now to open their checkbooks. You are going to give them that exact display. You are going to march up to that main stage in exactly 10 minutes. You will take the microphone and bless their union with a beautiful smile." I stared back at her without blinking once. "And if I completely refuse to play my pathetic part in your little circus?" Diana's eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. If you refuse me, I will permanently freeze your grandfather's inheritance trust tomorrow morning. You know I have the legal authority. You will never see a single penny. You will be completely penniless. Do not embarrass me tonight." Diana spun around and marched confidently back into the glittering crowd. I smoothed the delicate fabric of my white dress. My grandfather's trust was the last piece of leverage they held over me. Suddenly, a cold shadow fell across my path. Madison stood directly in front of me. She held a massive crystal goblet filled to the very brim with dark red wine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Grace enter the ballroom. My biological sister was walking quickly toward me. Her eyes locked fiercely on Madison. Madison stepped uncomfortably close. Her floral perfume was suffocating. She looked down at the flawless white silk of my elegant gown. She tilted her heavy glass forward intentionally. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she deliberately spilled the dark red wine completely. The freezing liquid soaked instantly through the expensive silk. It spread into a massive, jagged, bloody stain across my chest and stomach. Madison leaned in closely until her painted lips lightly brushed my ear. "You are a stain," she whispered, her voice dripping with pure malice. "You have always been a stain on this family." Grace saw the entire incident happen perfectly. My sister let out a furious shout and lunged forward. Her hands balled into incredibly tight fists. She was completely prepared to punch Madison directly in her smug face right in the middle of the crowded country club. I moved instantly to stop her. I reached out quickly and caught Grace firmly by the shoulder, pulling her backward with all my physical strength. I dug my fingers deeply into her collarbone, physically forcing her to halt her violent advance. "Do not touch her," I commanded in a sharp, quiet, authoritative voice. "She is not worth a single second of your energy or your anger." Madison laughed softly, turning swiftly on her designer heels, and walked proudly back to Carter's side. Grace stared at my ruined dress in absolute horror. "Stella, you absolutely cannot go out there looking like this. You have to leave right now. You have to go change." I looked down at the massive bleeding stain marking my chest. I smiled brilliantly through the dark red stains. I walked straight through the center of the massive crowd. Loud gasps rippled rapidly through the elite investors. I climbed the short steps to the main stage and tapped the microphone twice. I gave a flawless, tear-jerking toast, blessing the new couple. I pulled out a legal document. I publicly signed away my rights to my grandfather's trust, handing the document directly to Diana. "It is yours," I whispered. 2 weeks passed without a word from my family. I spent those days expanding my accounting firm and watching the markets react to the federal investigation into Carter. The silence from Diana and Madison was predictable. They believed they had won. They thought I was stripped of my trust. They were wrong. It was Tuesday afternoon when my office phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed Diana's name. I let it ring 4 times before pressing the speaker button. I did not stop typing. "What did you do?" Diana shrieked. Her voice was so shrill the audio distorted. I leaned back. "Hello, Mother. Are you enjoying the trust fund?" Diana was hyperventilating. "I am inside Neiman Marcus trying to purchase a crib." My black card declined. I handed them my platinum card, and that declined too. The manager looked at me like a criminal. I called my private banker. He told me the IRS placed a freeze on my personal and business accounts. He said there is a massive tax lien. "Fix this right now, Stella." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "I cannot fix your greed, Diana. You did this to yourself." "What are you talking about?" Diana demanded. Her voice echoed, suggesting she retreated to a quiet hallway to hide her panic from the staff. I opened the digital file on my desktop. It was a copy of the renunciation document I had signed at the gala. I smiled at the screen. "You wanted to secure that money to protect Madison and Carter, but you never bothered to read the financial history of the trust. You never hired an independent auditor. You assumed it was free cash." "It is a multi-million-dollar trust," Diana yelled. "It is a heavily leveraged corporate entity," I corrected her. My voice was pure ice. My grandfather made terrible real estate investments in his final years. He leveraged the trust to cover debts. The trust carried a hidden corporate tax lien of exactly $450,000. As the primary custodian, I was managing that debt. I was paying it off through my accounting firm to protect the family name. It was a quiet burden. The line went dead silent. Only Diana's rapid breathing could be heard. I continued delivering the brutal truth. When you threatened to ruin me if I did not sign my rights away, you fell into the trap. By forcing me to sign that document, you removed me as the custodian. State law mandates that any tax liability transfers to the next primary beneficiary. You demanded the trust. The state gave it to you, along with a legally binding federal tax lien of $500,000. The IRS wants their money. They froze your accounts because you are now the owner of a massive debt. You set me up. Diana gasped. Her voice shook with pure terror. You signed that paper knowing it would bankrupt me. I warned you that financial crimes catch up to arrogant people. I replied coldly. You should have treated your daughter with respect. I heard a car door slamming over the phone. Diana had fled the store and retreated to her sedan. She was crying now, but I felt no pity. I spent my entire life wearing Madison's discarded clothes while Diana threw money at her golden child. This was justice taking its natural course. I will have Carter pay it, Diana said desperately. We raised $2 million from the investors at the gala. Carter can wire the $450,000 to the IRS today to unfreeze my accounts. He owes me. I bailed him out. I invite you to ask him, I said. Diana did not hang up. I heard her car engine roar to life. I kept the phone on speaker and continued working. 15 minutes later, the background noise changed. I heard the doors of Diana's mansion opening. I heard Carter's voice echoing in the foyer. Carter, Diana screamed. We have an emergency. Stella trapped me. The trust came with a massive tax lien and the IRS froze every dollar I own. I need you to transfer $500,000 from the fund right now. Carter let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. Transfer it from where, Diana? From the $2 million we secured at the gala, Diana demanded. You have the capital. Pay the IRS. Unfreeze my life. Carter's voice was filled with venom. The federal agents did not just arrest me last week, Diana. They gutted my entire operation. The SEC placed a total lock on my hedge fund, the $2 million we raised. The feds seized it the second it hit my business account. They consider it evidence of wire fraud. I am completely locked out. My credit cards are bouncing. I cannot pay my attorney. I have nothing. We are entirely broke. Diana let out a horrifying shriek. She dropped the phone. I heard it clatter against the marble floor. The speakerphone picked up the sounds of her hyperventilating. We have nothing, she sobbed. The house is mortgaged. My accounts are frozen. The baby is coming. We will lose everything. Through the phone, I heard high heels descending the staircase. Madison had entered the foyer. Mother, stop crying, Madison commanded. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It lacked any trace of panic. How can I stop crying? Diana wailed. Carter is broke. I am bankrupt. Stella destroyed us. Madison picked up the dropped phone. I could hear her breathing into the receiver. She knew I was still listening. She did not hang up. She turned to her mother. I told you the baby was leverage, Madison whispered. Her voice was low and dripping with dark intent. We are not going to lose this house. If Carter cannot provide the money, we will extract it from someone else. I have a new plan. We will make Stella pay for everything she has done, and she will hand over the money when I finish. The line went dead. The silence in my office was profound after the call disconnected. I knew exactly what Madison was doing in that sprawling suburban mansion. She was spinning a web of pure desperation. Diana had always been terrified of poverty. She married her way into wealth and spent her entire life desperately clinging to the illusion of untouchable status. Madison knew this better than anyone. Over the next 48 hours, Madison executed a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She did not ask Diana for money directly. She used the fake child. Madison paced the marble floors of the estate, clutching her stomach and sobbing dramatically. She told Diana that Carter was facing 20 years in federal prison. She painted a horrifying picture of her unborn baby growing up without a father visiting him behind reinforced glass. Madison insisted that Carter just needed a temporary influx of cash to hire a specialized defense team to unfreeze his assets. Diana was completely cornered. Her credit cards were declining. Her country club friends were beginning to whisper. The IRS had frozen her liquid accounts. The only untouched asset she had left was the sprawling family estate itself. The house was fully paid off, a permanent sanctuary my biological father had purchased decades ago. Madison brought the predatory lender directly into Diana's living room. He was a ruthless private equity broker who specialized in high-interest short-term bridge loans. He offered $500,000 against the deed of the house. The interest rate was absolutely astronomical. Diana hesitated, her hands shaking as she held the gold pen. She looked around the lavish room, terrified of losing her social standing. Madison knelt beside her chair and rested her head on Diana's lap. Madison whispered that family sacrifices were necessary, using Diana's exact favorite phrase against her. She promised that Carter would pay off the mortgage the second his hedge fund was unfrozen. Diana broke under the pressure. She pressed the pen to the thick paper and signed the estate away entirely. She handed over the deed to the only true security she had ever known. I knew all of this because I never stopped watching. I sat in my downtown office, bathed in the blue light of my dual monitors. My forensic accounting software was running a continuous real-time trace on every financial entity connected to my family. Grace stood behind my left shoulder. David stood behind my right shoulder. We were a silent tribunal watching the digital execution of Diana's empire. David leaned forward and rested his heavy hands on the back of my leather chair. His eyes were locked onto the scrolling lines of code and routing numbers illuminating the dark screen. "You really think she took the bait?" David asked quietly. I did not take my eyes off the monitor. Diana is predictable. She operates entirely on fear and pride. Madison operates entirely on greed. It is a highly combustible combination. I tapped a command into the keyboard to refresh the public property registry database. A new line of green text appeared instantly. There it is. Diana just finalized a high-interest mortgage against the primary estate. The private lender just wired $450,000 directly into Diana's newly opened, unrestricted checking account. Grace let out a sharp breath. She actually mortgaged the house. She risked the roof over her head for a man who cheated on you and stole millions. Diana is completely out of her mind. She thinks she is saving Carter and her future grandchild, I replied. But Madison has absolutely no intention of saving anyone but herself. Watch the screen closely. The forensic software chimed softly. A massive wire transfer had just been initiated from Diana's checking account. The $450,000 was moving. Diana believed she was sending the money to Carter's elite legal team. She thought she was paying the retainer to secure his freedom and unfreeze his assets to pay off her new predatory mortgage. David pointed a thick finger at the top right quadrant of my monitor. Look at the destination routing code. That is not a domestic transfer. That money is not going to the Internal Revenue Service to clear the tax lien on the grandfather trust. The IRS uses specific federal routing protocols. This transfer is bouncing through a completely different financial corridor. I typed, rapidly deploying a tracing algorithm I had built specifically for international corporate audits. I highlighted the routing pathway. David is right, I said. Diana authorized the wire transfer, but Madison was the one who provided the destination account numbers. Madison convinced her that Carter's lawyers needed the funds routed through a secure corporate proxy to avoid the ongoing federal freeze. Diana signed the authorization without understanding the digital architecture she was navigating. Grace leaned closer to the screen. Her reflection hovered over the scrolling data. Where is the money actually going, Stella? Are they paying off the bail bondsman? I shook my head. The digital footprint was complex but sloppy. Madison was arrogant. She believed she was smarter than a seasoned forensic accountant. She assumed the money would vanish into the ether before anyone noticed. but I could see every single digital footprint she left behind. The first jump occurred within seconds. The $450,000 landed in a domestic holding company registered in Delaware. Less than a minute later, the funds were automatically swept out of the Delaware account. They bounced to a secondary shell corporation located in Cyprus. David crossed his arms over his chest. That is classic money laundering layering. They are trying to wash the origin of the funds. They want to sever the connection between Diana's mortgage and the final destination. But they move the money way too fast. It triggers automatic federal banking red flags. I bypassed the digital firewall completely. The massive stolen funds finally landed securely inside a private offshore account, registered solely and exclusively under Madison's own name. Exactly 2 weeks passed in absolute silence. The sudden quiet was a clear indicator that the financial walls were rapidly closing in on the estate. I was sitting at a small corner table inside a quiet downtown coffee shop. The bell above the glass door chimed sharply. I did not look up immediately. Heavy, frantic footsteps approached my table. I finally raised my eyes and found Diana standing directly over me. The transformation was genuinely shocking. Diana had always maintained a flawless physical appearance. Now her designer coat was deeply wrinkled. Her perfectly dyed hair showed an inch of stark gray roots. Her hands were shaking visibly as she gripped the back of the empty chair opposite me. She did not ask for permission before pulling the chair out and collapsing into it. "You have to help me right now," Diana demanded. Her voice was a desperate, raspy whisper. She leaned across the small wooden table. "My bank accounts are completely frozen. The private lender filed a preliminary notice of default on the estate yesterday. I cannot buy groceries. I cannot pay the utility bills. You are going to write me a check to cover my living expenses and the first mortgage installment. You owe me this." I folded my hands together and stared at the woman who had spent my entire childhood treating me like an unwanted burden. "I do not owe you a single penny, Diana. I will not pay your rent. I will not pay your mortgage. You signed that predatory loan agreement with your own hand. You chose to risk your entire financial future to protect Carter and Madison. You can ask them for grocery money." Diana slammed her palm against the table. The loud noise caused several other customers to turn and stare. "I am your mother," Diana hissed viciously. "I gave birth to you. I put a roof over your head and fed you for 18 years. You have a moral and biological obligation to support me in my time of need. You have millions of dollars in your accounting firm. You will not let your own mother become homeless." I did not raise my voice. I reached down into my leather briefcase resting on the floor. I pulled out a thick stack of printed financial documents clipped firmly together. I dropped the heavy ledger directly onto the table in front of her. "I do not have a mother," I replied coldly. "I had a warden who treated me like a financial liability. You want to talk about family obligations. Let us talk about where your money actually went. Open the folder, Diana." Diana stared at the thick ledger as if it were a venomous snake. She reached out with trembling fingers and flipped open the heavy cover. Her eyes darted across the highlighted spreadsheets and bank routing numbers. I pointed to the first page. "Those are your personal retirement accounts. Notice the continuous withdrawals over the past 2 full years. Carter actively drained your personal wealth to maintain his own illusion of success. He convinced you to grant him discretionary access to your portfolios. Instead of maximizing your returns, he systematically looted your retirement. Look at the corresponding expenditure column on the right side." Diana traced her finger down the column. Her breathing became incredibly shallow. "That money did not go into the market," I explained quietly. "It went directly to Madison. Carter used your retirement funds to finance her luxury shopping habits for 2 entire years. Every designer handbag she flaunted in your face was paid for by your drained accounts. Every extravagant vacation they took was funded by your stolen future." Diana flipped to the next page rapidly, the color completely drained from her face. "That is the final nail in your coffin," I stated. "That is the exact digital trail of the $450,000 you borrowed against the estate." David and Grace watched the screen over my shoulder closely. David pointed out the routing numbers. The money did not go to the Internal Revenue Service. It did not go to Carter's legal team. It bounced through 3 shell companies. It ultimately landed in a private offshore account registered solely under Madison's name. She stole the equity of your home and hid it forever. Diana sat perfectly still. The absolute reality of her complete ruin crashed down upon her shoulders. The golden child she had protected and elevated above me had orchestrated her total destruction. Diana closed the ledger. She did not say a single word to me. She stood up rigidly, her face an expressionless mask of pure shock, and walked out of the coffee shop into the cold afternoon air. Diana gripped the steering wheel of her sedan with white knuckles. She drove recklessly back to the sprawling estate. Her mind was a chaotic storm of betrayal and rage. She pulled into the cobblestone driveway and slammed the car into park. She marched to the massive iron front doors and threw them open. She stormed into the grand foyer, clutching the heavy financial ledger against her chest. Carter and Madison were sitting comfortably in the lavish living room. Madison was scrolling through her phone. Carter was pouring a glass of expensive bourbon. Diana marched directly up to them and violently threw the ledger onto the glass coffee table. "I know everything," Diana screamed. "I know you stole my retirement funds. I know you funneled the mortgage money into a private offshore account. Give me my money back right now." Carter slowly took a sip of his bourbon. He looked down at the scattered financial documents. He did not look panicked. Instead, a slow, cruel smile spread across his handsome face. Carter tilted his head back and laughed loudly. Carter laughed again. "You are losing your mind, Diana. You are acting completely senile. Do you really believe this garbage Stella fabricated this entire ledger out of pure jealousy? She printed forged documents to destroy us completely." Carter's cruel, arrogant laughter echoed off the tall marble walls. He poured another glass of bourbon and dismissed the financial ledger as a jealous fabrication. Diana stood frozen, oscillating between the terrifying mathematical truth and the comfortable lie the golden boy was spinning. Madison moved to Carter's side, nodding in agreement. They assured Diana the federal audit was a routine misunderstanding and the offshore transfer was a secure corporate proxy. Diana, desperate to cling to her former reality, swallowed the lie. That evening, she hosted a dinner party for Carter's last 3 remaining investors. If they walked away, the entire financial structure would collapse. I arrived at the estate precisely at 7. I walked into the sunken dining room wearing a sharp black suit. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Carter was sweating through his designer collar, laughing too loudly at the dry jokes. Madison sat beside him, keeping one hand firmly planted on her fake baby bump. She played the expectant mother, perfectly smiling warmly at the wealthy men. Diana sat at the head of the mahogany table, gripping her silver fork tightly. I took the empty seat directly across from Madison. I simply stared directly at her, letting the absolute certainty of my forensic evidence hang heavily in the air. Carter raised his crystal glass to propose a toast to future prosperity. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the dark wood. I smiled directly at the wealthiest investor. "I hear the financial climate in Cyprus is beautifully unregulated this time of year," I said smoothly. My voice cut through the polite dinner chatter like a surgical blade. The investor lowered his glass, looking at me with sharp interest. Carter's face turned the color of wet ash. I continued my relentless assault. "It is truly remarkable how quickly $500,000 can bounce through Delaware shell companies before landing safely in a private offshore account. Do you gentlemen frequently utilize such rapid layering techniques to protect your personal capital from federal audits?" The silence in the dining room became absolute. The investors exchanged dark, calculating glances. One of them pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly under the table. Carter stammered, but his usual charisma had evaporated. Madison stared at me. She saw the raw truth in my eyes. She realized instantly that my evidence was not a bluff. She knew the investors were already doing the math in their heads. The federal freeze, the desperation for cash, the offshore accounts. The walls were rapidly closing in. She was about to lose everything. Madison needed a catastrophic distraction. She needed something so massive and emotionally devastating that it would completely invalidate everything I was saying. She stood up from the table abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. She pressed her hand against her forehead, feigning a sudden wave of severe dizziness. "I need to get some fresh air," Madison gasped, breathlessly. She turned away from the table and walked quickly toward the short flight of 2 marble steps that separated the sunken dining room from the main hallway. I watched her every single move with absolute cold calculation. I stood up and followed her, stopping several feet away to observe her theatrical exit. Madison reached the top of the 2 small stairs. She stopped. She turned her head slightly and locked her eyes directly onto mine. There was no dizziness in her expression. There was only pure calculating malice. She gave me a tiny, imperceptible smirk. Then, without a single moment of hesitation, Madison violently threw her entire body forward. She launched herself down the 2 short steps. She twisted her body unnaturally in midair, ensuring she landed hard against the marble floor. A blood-curdling, agonizing scream ripped from her throat. It was a terrifying sound that shattered the tense silence of the estate. She hit the ground and immediately curled into a tight defensive ball. She wrapped both of her arms fiercely around her flat stomach and began to wail in absolute agony. The dining room erupted into total chaos. The investors leapt from their seats in shock. Diana let out a horrifying shriek and scrambled frantically across the room. She dropped to her knees on the hard marble next to her golden child. Diana grabbed Madison's shoulders, her face pale with absolute terror. "Madison! My baby! What happened?" Diana screamed. Carter rushed over, hovering above them, his hands gripping his hair in a theatrical display of panic. Madison writhed on the floor. She squeezed her eyes shut and let out another piercing scream. She uncurled one of her arms, raised a shaking finger, and pointed it directly at my chest. I was standing 5 feet away, my hands resting calmly at my sides. She pushed me. Madison sobbed hysterically. Stella pushed me down the stairs. "She wants to ruin my family. She killed my baby." Diana gasped and looked up at me with murderous hatred. The investors backed away, horrified by the accusation. I did not move a single muscle. I looked down at Madison writhing on the marble floor. We both knew the truth. There was absolutely no baby to kill. In the distance, the sharp wail of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Carter had already dialed emergency services. The flashing lights reflected against the massive front windows. 2 paramedics rushed through the iron doors carrying a heavy medical bag and a stretcher. They dropped to the floor beside Madison, asking rapid questions and checking her vitals. She continued to sob, clutching her stomach and burying her face against Diana's expensive dress. Carter stood up slowly and walked toward me. He stopped mere inches from my face. He glared down at me with cold, dead eyes. "You are going to rot in a federal cell for this," Carter whispered viciously. "You just murdered my unborn child. I am going to put you behind bars for the rest of your miserable, pathetic, empty life, Stella. You will never see the light of day again." The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area buzzed with a relentless hum. I sat in the center of a row of stiff plastic chairs, keeping my posture perfectly rigid and my breathing completely controlled. Grace sat on my left, her hands folded tightly in her lap. David stood tall on my right like a heavily armed sentinel, his sheer physical presence creating an invisible barrier between me and the chaotic rage unraveling across the room. We followed the ambulance from the estate. I knew exactly what kind of performance Madison was going to put on for the medical staff, and I needed to be present for the grand finale. Carter paced the length of the waiting room like a rabid animal trapped in a small cage. His expensive dinner suit was violently rumpled. He marched back and forth, occasionally stopping to point a trembling, accusatory finger in my direction. He shouted that I was a calculating monster. He told the reception nurses that I had pushed his pregnant fiancée down a flight of marble stairs out of financial jealousy. He screamed that I was trying to destroy his family because my own life was pathetic. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let him expend his energy knowing that every single word he shouted was just another shovel of dirt he was throwing onto his own grave. Diana sat in a corner chair clutching a damp tissue and rocking back and forth. She played the role of the traumatized matriarch with sickening perfection. When two police officers walked through the sliding glass doors, Diana sprang to her feet. She rushed toward them, her face a mask of manufactured horror and tearful desperation. She grabbed the lead officer by the sleeve of his dark uniform and began sobbing uncontrollably. She pointed directly at me, her voice echoing loudly off the sterile white walls. Diana told the officer that she saw the entire incident with her own eyes. She gave a highly detailed, completely fabricated statement. She claimed I had been harassing Madison all evening, demanding money and threatening violence. Diana swore she saw me raise my hands and violently shove Madison backward down the stairs. She wept, telling the police that I had deliberately targeted Madison because I was deeply jealous of the unborn baby. She begged the officers to arrest me immediately for attempted murder. She insisted I was a severe danger to society and needed to be locked away before I could finish the job. I reached into my pocket and slowly pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera application and pressed record. I held the device up, making it obvious that I was filming the entire interaction. The lead officer stepped away from Diana and approached my chair. He rested his hand on his utility belt. He asked me to stand up and provide my version of the events. He warned me that multiple witnesses were ready to testify against me. I remained seated. I looked the officer directly in the eye, maintaining absolute calm. "I am not going to provide a statement regarding a fictional assault," I said smoothly. "My mother just committed a felony by providing a false police report. She did not witness a physical altercation because no physical altercation occurred. Madison threw herself down those stairs to create a diversion. She is currently under investigation for massive financial fraud, and she needed a medical emergency to delay the federal authorities." Carter lunged toward me, his face twisting with violent rage. David stepped forward, instantly blocking Carter completely. The police officer held his hand out, warning Carter to back away immediately. The officer turned his attention back to me, his expression hardening. He told me that accusing the victim of faking an incident was not a valid legal defense. He pulled out metal handcuffs and stated that based on the eyewitness testimony of my own mother, he had sufficient probable cause to take me into custody for aggravated assault. I did not break eye contact with the officer. I kept the camera steady. "Before you make a career-ending mistake based on the hysterical lies of a desperate woman, I strongly suggest you exercise a little basic due diligence," I replied evenly. "You are standing in an emergency room. The alleged victim is currently being examined by highly trained medical professionals. Before you place those handcuffs on my wrists, I demand that you walk through those double doors and verify the medical charts. Ask the attending physician to confirm the physical trauma. Ask them to confirm the status of the unborn child. If you arrest me right now without verifying the fundamental facts of the medical emergency, my legal team will ensure you are stripped of your badge by tomorrow morning." The officer hesitated. He looked at my calm demeanor, then looked back at Carter, who was sweating profusely and breathing heavily. The sheer confidence in my voice made the officer second-guess the situation. He instructed his partner to remain in the waiting room and monitor us. He then turned and walked through the heavy swinging doors leading into the trauma bay. The waiting room fell into a suffocating, unbearable silence. The digital clock on the wall ticked forward relentlessly. Diana stopped crying and stared at the swinging doors with wide, terrified eyes. Carter resumed his pacing, but his steps were slower, heavier, filled with a sudden, creeping dread. He pulled out his phone and stared at the blank screen, completely out of options. David and Grace stood perfectly still, watching the psychological collapse of the empire. I simply sat and waited. I knew exactly what the medical scans were going to reveal. I knew that Madison's ultimate lie was about to detonate. The ER attending physician walks through the double doors. He looks at Carter with utter confusion. "Mr. Carter, your fiancée did not suffer a miscarriage. She is not pregnant. Furthermore, she has not been pregnant in years." Carter's face went blank. The doctor's words hung in the air like a physical blow. Diana gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Her hands flew to her mouth. I sat perfectly still, capturing every microscopic shift in their expressions on video. Carter realized instantly his house of cards was disintegrating. He did not hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbed the attending physician by the bicep, and physically dragged him into a private consultation room. He slammed the heavy door shut, cutting off the protests. Madison heard the doctor's booming voice echoing through the glass partitions. She knew the medical scans had exposed her fabricated pregnancy. She needed a secondary layer of deception immediately. Madison slipped off her gurney, ignoring the nurses yelling for her to remain seated. She hurried down the sterile corridor, scanning the name badges of the administrative staff. She found exactly who she was looking for. Gregory Vance was a senior hospital administrator handling high-profile admissions. Carter had used Vance in the past to quietly expedite medical clearances for his wealthy investors. Madison cornered Vance in a dimly lit hallway near the administrative offices. She pulled a thick envelope of emergency cash from her designer handbag. Carter always kept untraceable cash on hand for emergencies. Madison pressed the heavy envelope directly against Vance's chest. She spoke in a rapid whisper. She demanded that Vance access the centralized hospital database immediately. She instructed him to override the physician's notes and officially log her admission as a traumatic miscarriage induced by violent assault. Vance hesitated for a fraction of a second, feeling the immense weight of the cash. He slipped the envelope into his jacket and nodded once. 10 minutes later, Vance walked into the waiting room holding a freshly printed medical chart. He handed it directly to the police officer, bypassing the physician. Vance stated clearly that the initial verbal report was a miscommunication caused by emergency room chaos. The legally binding hospital record now stated that Madison had suffered a catastrophic loss of pregnancy due to blunt force trauma. Diana let out a cry of relief, choosing the comfortable lie over the terrifying truth. The officer looked at me, tapping the chart. My digital recording meant nothing against an official document. I stood up, signaled for David and Grace, and walked out of the hospital. I knew the brutal war had just escalated today. 72 hours later, I was sitting behind my heavy oak desk in my downtown office. The glass doors of my firm swung open. Carter strode into my office without knocking. He bypassed the receptionist and marched directly toward my desk. His previous panic was completely gone. He wore a sharp-tailored suit and a smirk of absolute arrogant triumph. He carried a thick manila folder. He slammed the heavy folder down onto the center of my desk with a loud, aggressive crack. He leaned forward, planting both of his hands on the polished wood. "You really thought you could outsmart me?" Carter said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You thought your little forensic accounting trick was going to ruin my life. But you forgot one fundamental rule of power, Stella. The truth is simply whatever I can prove on paper. And I can prove that you are a murderer." I did not flinch. I slowly opened the manila folder. It was a massive civil lawsuit filed in federal court. Carter was suing me for $3 million. The charges listed were severe emotional distress, malicious physical assault, and the wrongful death of an unborn child. Attached to the lawsuit was a certified, notarized copy of the altered hospital admission chart signed by Gregory Vance. Carter had weaponized the medical system against me. "This lawsuit is going to freeze every single asset your firm possesses," Carter sneered, pacing slowly in front of my desk. "I am going to bleed your accounts dry in legal fees. I am going to drag your name through the mud until no client ever trusts you again. You are going to write me a check for $3 million to settle this quietly, or I will put you in a cage. You lose, Stella. It is over." Carter turned on his heel and walked out of my office, leaving the door wide open. I sat perfectly still, staring at the fraudulent lawsuit resting on my desk. The sheer audacity of his psychological warfare was impressive. He believed he had trapped me in a legal corner where I would be forced to surrender my own wealth to save my freedom. David walked quietly into my office. He closed the heavy glass door behind him and locked it. He did not look worried. He walked over to my desk and placed a small silver USB drive directly on top of Carter's lawsuit. David had spent a decade working as a top-tier medical fraud investigator before joining my firm. He knew the hidden architecture of hospital security systems better than the administrators who ran them. David looked down at the lawsuit and let out a low, dark chuckle. Carter is severely underestimating who he is dealing with, David said smoothly. Gregory Vance wiped the digital access logs, but he forgot that the hospital's backup security servers are maintained by an independent third-party contractor. I bypassed their firewall an hour ago. I picked up the heavy silver USB drive, feeling the cold metal firmly against my bare palm. I turned it over slowly, carefully examining the small device. "What exactly am I looking at right now, David?" I asked him very quietly. David leaned forward, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "You are looking at a high-definition security video with perfect audio. It shows Madison handing Gregory Vance a thick envelope of cash in the hallway. We have her on tape explicitly ordering him to falsify the medical chart. Carter just filed a $3 million lawsuit based on a forged medical document. He just committed federal extortion." The deposition room felt like a refrigerated vault designed to suffocate the truth. Fluorescent lights buzzed loudly overhead, casting a sickly pale glow across the long mahogany conference table that dominated the space. I sat perfectly upright in a rigid leather chair, my posture immaculate. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, displaying absolute control. My attorney Marcus sat silently to my left, holding a single thin folder. Across the wide table sat Carter. He wore a bespoke navy suit and a smirk that screamed total arrogance. He truly believed his fabricated $3 million lawsuit was going to break my spirit and drain my bank accounts. Next to him sat his aggressive lead defense attorney, a notoriously ruthless litigator named Thomas Sterling. Sterling was a corporate shark who specialized in destroying witnesses through sheer psychological intimidation. He arranged his thick files, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and forcefully signaled for the court reporter to begin the official transcription. Sterling did not waste a single second on legal pleasantries. He immediately launched into a vicious, highly calculated character assassination. He paced the length of the room like a predator, firing rapid questions designed to provoke an emotional outburst. He wanted me to look unstable on the official record. He painted a pathetic manufactured picture of a jealous, unhinged woman who simply could not accept that her husband had moved on to a younger, more vibrant partner. "You were absolutely furious, were you not, Stella?" Sterling barked, leaning heavily across the table and invading my personal space. "You dedicated your entire life to your firm, neglecting your marital duties and ultimately failing to give my client the family he so desperately wanted. You are a bitter, barren ex-wife who concocted a malicious physical assault purely out of spite. You pushed an expectant mother down a flight of hard marble stairs because you could not bear to see her carry the child you were biologically incapable of providing. Is that not the absolute truth of this tragic situation?" Carter leaned back in his chair, visibly soaking in the cruel humiliation. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry. He needed me to look hysterical so he could validate the fraudulent medical charts he had submitted to the court. I did not give him a single drop of satisfaction. I sat perfectly still, anchored by the flawless evidence waiting in my arsenal. My breathing was slow and meticulously measured. I looked directly into Sterling's aggressive, staring eyes, with a gaze so intensely cold it made him momentarily falter. I did not raise my voice a single decibel when I finally answered his ridiculous tirade. "I am a forensic accountant, Mr. Sterling," I stated with icy precision. "I do not deal in petty emotional jealousy or biological shortcomings. I deal entirely in verifiable numbers, documented asset transfers, and immutable financial facts." Sterling scoffed loudly and waved a dismissive hand in the air. "We are not here to discuss your accounting firm or your spreadsheets," he snapped viciously. "We are here to discuss the wrongful death of an unborn child and the $3 million you owe my client for severe emotional and financial distress." I kept my eyes locked on the attorney, watching the pulse beat rapidly in his neck. "I understand your client is claiming severe financial and emotional distress," I replied smoothly. "However, I find that specific legal claim mathematically fascinating. For example, a man experiencing such profound financial distress would normally rely on his domestic capital to survive. Yet your client recently initiated a massive, highly illegal transfer of stolen equity. Let the official record reflect that on the evening of October 12th, Carter authorized a wire transfer of exactly $450,000. That money bypassed domestic taxation completely and was funneled directly through a Delaware shell corporation registered under the specific corporate identifier Delta Echo 79er. Sterling stopped pacing immediately. He frowned, looking down at his carefully prepared notes, clearly confused by my sudden pivot. I did not give him a chance to object or interrupt the flow of data. I continued speaking clearly and deliberately, ensuring the court reporter captured every single syllable. From that initial Delaware holding company, the funds were instantly swept into a secondary corporate proxy. They finally landed securely in a private, untraceable offshore account located in Cyprus. I want the court reporter to log the exact destination routing number right now. It is Cyprus International Bank Account Sequence 4822-9104-Omega. The account is registered exclusively to Madison, funded entirely by predatory loans taken against my mother's primary estate. The silence in the deposition room became absolute and suffocating. The only sound was the rapid rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's fingers dancing across her stenography machine. Sterling stood completely frozen at the edge of the mahogany table. He was a ruthless lawyer, but he was certainly not stupid. He knew exactly what an offshore Cyprus account meant. He knew exactly what federal tax evasion, grand larceny, and international wire fraud looked like. The blood completely drained from his face as he processed the routing numbers now permanently etched into the legal transcript. He slowly turned his head and stared at his client. Carter was completely pale, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead and soaking into his pristine collar. Sterling realized in a flash of terrifying clarity that he had been completely blinded. He had staked his professional reputation on a man who had just perjured himself while hiding massive criminal assets. Sterling slammed his heavy legal pad shut with a deafening crack. "We are taking a recess immediately," Sterling barked. He reached out and grabbed Carter tightly by the bicep, his fingers digging fiercely into the expensive fabric of the suit. He violently dragged his furiously sweating, utterly terrified client out through the heavy wooden doors and directly into the long, cold, and empty hallway. I sat alone in the deposition room, listening to the muffled shouts echoing through the doors. Sterling was methodically dismantling Carter in the hallway. A few minutes later, Sterling re-entered the room alone. He packed his briefcase with sharp, angry movements. He looked at my attorney Marcus and stated that he was formally withdrawing as Carter's legal counsel due to irreconcilable ethical conflicts. Sterling walked out, leaving Carter completely legally exposed and entirely alone. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the building. The lawsuit was dead, but my retaliation was just beginning. I returned to my office and locked the door. David was waiting for me. We spread the evidence across my desk. We had the high-definition video of Madison bribing Gregory Vance. We had the forged hospital admission charts. We had the exact routing numbers for the Cyprus International Bank offshore accounts. Carter had built his entire investment firm on an illusion of absolute stability and impenetrable trust. He catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals who demanded absolute discretion and flawless ethical standards. I was about to show them exactly who was managing their fortunes. I purchased 3 presentation folders. I did not use my firm's letterhead. I wore gloves to ensure no fingerprints were left on the glossy paper. I compiled a blind dossier for Carter's top 3 investors. The first page contained the unredacted Cyprus account sequences, tracing the illicit transfer of $450,000 directly from Diana's estate to Madison's hidden offshore vault. The second page contained side-by-side comparisons of the original emergency room notes and the fraudulent admission chart purchased from Gregory Vance. The third page was a flash drive containing the security footage of the bribe. I placed the dossiers into priority overnight shipping envelopes. I paid in cash at a postal hub. The tracking numbers confirmed delivery at 9 the next morning. Carter arrived at his sleek corporate office at 10 sharp. He was already drowning in panic from losing his lead defense attorney. He walked through the glass double doors of his firm, expecting the usual quiet hum of high finance. Instead, he found chaos. His receptionist was standing behind her desk, visibly shaking. Sitting in the premium leather waiting area were his three largest investors. Combined, they represented 80% of Carter's total managed capital. They looked absolutely murderous. Arthur Sterling, a ruthless real estate magnate, stood up. He bypassed the receptionist and marched directly toward Carter. He held the heavy black presentation folder in his right hand. Arthur did not ask for a private meeting. He did not care who was listening. He threw the folder directly at Carter's chest. The glossy papers spilled across the imported marble floor. Arthur pointed a thick finger directly at Carter's face. "You are running a criminal enterprise," Arthur shouted, his voice booming through the open concept office. "You are hiding stolen assets in Cyprus offshore accounts while lying to federal courts. You are bribing medical officials. I do not care about your pathetic divorce drama, Carter. I care about my money." Carter scrambled backward, his face draining of blood. He tried to laugh, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Arthur, please, this is a massive misunderstanding," Carter stammered desperately. "My ex-wife is conducting a malicious smear campaign. Those documents are completely fabricated." The second investor, a tech billionaire named Richard Vance, stepped forward. He pulled the silver flash drive from his pocket. "It is very difficult to fabricate high-definition security footage of your pregnant girlfriend, handing a hospital administrator a stack of untraceable cash," Richard stated with lethal calm. "I had my personal security team verify the video metadata an hour ago. It is absolutely authentic. You are a liability, Carter." The third investor remained seated, but spoke with a quiet authority that cut through the shouting. "We are invoking the emergency withdrawal clause in our investment contracts," she said smoothly. "We are pulling our capital, all of it, effective immediately." Carter's knees practically buckled. He grabbed the edge of a glass conference table to stay upright. "You cannot do that," Carter pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "The liquidity margins require a 90-day notice for catastrophic withdrawals. If you pull everything today, the firm will completely collapse." Arthur stepped into Carter's personal space. "Then the firm collapses," Arthur snarled. "I am transferring my legal team to your office in exactly 1 hour. If my funds are not wired back to my primary accounts by 3 o'clock this afternoon, I am forwarding this entire dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Arthur turned and walked out. The other two investors followed him without a single backward glance. Carter stood trembling in the center of his ruined empire. The phones began ringing incessantly as rumors of the confrontation spread through the financial district. Employees stopped working and stared at him. Carter knew he was ruined. He had exactly 5 hours to produce hundreds of millions of dollars in liquid capital. He retreated into his private office and locked the door, hyperventilating. Carter sprinted to his car. He drove recklessly to Madison's upscale condominium. He hammered his fists against her door until she opened it. Madison wore a white silk robe. She looked perfectly relaxed. "The investors know everything," Carter shouted, pacing her pristine living room. "I need you to transfer the $450,000 back to my account immediately. We have to run." Madison walked to the velvet sofa and sat down. She looked at Carter with absolute chilling indifference. "I cannot do that," Madison said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Carter froze. "What do you mean?" he demanded, gasping for air. Madison just smiled slowly. "I checked the Cyprus banking portal this morning. It seems my security credentials were compromised during the night. My account was completely hacked. The money is gone, Carter. Every single penny. You are entirely on your own now." Carter did not believe Madison for a single second. The hack was a transparent lie. He grabbed her arm and dragged her out of the condominium. They drove in silence through the winding roads toward Diana's estate. The mansion was no longer a symbol of wealth. It was a ticking time bomb. The predatory loan Carter leveraged was officially in default. Foreclosure notices were arriving stacked neatly on the tray in the foyer. They burst through the heavy front doors. The vast foyer echoed with the sound of their vicious screaming match. Carter hurled his jacket onto the marble floor, his face flushed with unhinged rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Madison's chest. "You are lying to my face!" Carter roared, his voice echoing violently off the high ceiling. "You transferred that money into a secondary account the second you realized my firm was collapsing. You are hoarding the cash to save yourself while I take the fall for the forged medical records. I know exactly how you operate, Madison. You are a parasite. I need that $450,000 right now to pay off Arthur Sterling, or I am going to federal prison by midnight." Madison stood in the center of the foyer, completely unbothered by his screaming. The devoted maternal facade she had perfected over the last year vanished entirely. Her features hardened into a mask of pure, calculating venom. She crossed her arms and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through Carter's hysteria. "You are going to prison regardless." Madison snapped back, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You are completely delusional if you think $450,000 is going to plug the gaping hole in your fraudulent empire. Your investors despise you. Your lawyers abandoned you. You are a broke, pathetic fraud who built a life on stolen money and arrogant lies. Do not dare call me a parasite when you are begging a woman to save you from your staggering incompetence." Carter lunged forward, stopping inches from her face. "You owe me," he snarled, his breathing heavy and ragged. "I gave you this lifestyle. I brought you into this family. I protected you from Stella when she started digging into your past. You will transfer those funds back to me right now, or I will hand the police the security footage of you bribing the hospital administrator myself. We will go down together." They were entirely consumed by their mutual hatred. They did not notice the shadow moving at the top of the grand sweeping staircase. Diana stood completely frozen in the dim light of the second-floor hallway. She wore a silk dressing gown clutching the wooden banister so tightly her knuckles were stark white. The sudden shouting had woken her from a deep sleep. She had crept out of her master suite to demand quiet, but the words echoing up the stairwell paralyzed her. She listened in absolute horror as the golden son she worshipped and the perfect daughter-in-law she protected viciously tore each other apart, laying bare the monstrous truth of their financial crimes. Madison threw her head back and laughed right in Carter's desperate face. "Go ahead, hand them the tape," Madison challenged him fiercely. "I will tell the district attorney that you masterminded the entire medical fraud to protect your precious firm. I will tell them you manipulated the offshore accounts. You have absolutely no leverage left, Carter. You are finished. I am not going down with a sinking ship." Carter's face twisted in disbelief. He realized she was completely discarding him. "After everything I sacrificed for you?" he whispered, his voice cracking with genuine panic. Madison stepped forward, her eyes flashing with ruthless cruelty. "I only stayed with you for the money, and Diana is just a gullible old fool who handed me her house." She screamed at the top of her lungs, ensuring the words bounced off every opulent wall. She signed over the equity without reading a single page because she was desperate to believe she was finally getting a grandchild. "It was the easiest scam of my entire life. She practically begged us to rob her blind." A sharp, broken gasp echoed from the top of the stairs. Carter and Madison snapped their heads upward. Diana stepped slowly out of the shadows and into the harsh light of the chandelier. Her face was gray, drained of all life and arrogance. She looked like a ghost haunting her own ruined home. The reality of what she had just heard crushed the breath out of her lungs. Her precious son was a criminal facing federal prison. The pregnancy she had fiercely defended was a malicious financial scam. The home she had lived in for 40 years was gone, stolen by the very people she had chosen to protect. Diana stumbled down the stairs, ignoring Carter as he frantically rushed forward to offer a pathetic, stuttering explanation. She pushed past him, her hands shaking violently. She walked straight into the formal dining room and locked the heavy double doors behind her. She collapsed into a chair, gasping for air, as a severe panic attack seized her chest. She had alienated her friends. She had mortgaged her future. She had viciously attacked Stella, the only person who had tried to warn her. Diana pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling fingers. She dialed Stella's number, praying for a miracle. The phone rang 3 times before the line clicked open. Stella Diana sobbed, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "Stella, please. You have to help me. You were right about everything. They stole the house. Carter is going to prison. Madison lied about the baby. I have absolutely nothing left. I am begging you, Stella. I need your legal team. I need you to save me from this nightmare." Stella listened silently, then replied, "Family sacrifices. You are selfish. Family sacrifices." She hung up the phone. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse slammed shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the packed gallery. 2 weeks had passed since Diana's desperate weeping phone call, and I had not spoken a single word to her since. I let her drown in the toxic swamp she had created. My focus was entirely on the battlefield ahead. The $3 million emotional distress and wrongful death lawsuit had moved to trial with staggering speed. Carter wanted to bleed me dry publicly, using the system for his revenge. The courtroom was utterly suffocated by the sheer volume of spectators, financial reporters, and eager legal associates waiting to see the destruction of my firm. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of the bodies pressed into the wooden pews. Every single gaze was fixed firmly on my back, anticipating a brutal and humiliating defeat. Carter sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like the absolute picture of a shattered, grieving father. He had shed his flashy, aggressive designer suits for a subdued, conservative charcoal jacket and a muted gray tie. His shoulders were deliberately slumped to project overwhelming defeat. He stared down at his folded hands, occasionally bringing a trembling knuckle to his lower lip, as if fighting back a fresh, paralyzing wave of agony. It was a masterful, sickening performance designed to manipulate the narrative. He had managed to secure a new, highly aggressive litigator to replace Sterling, a man named Vance Harrison, who specialized exclusively in milking jury sympathy for massive corporate payouts. Harrison paced the polished floor, painting a gruesome, entirely fictional portrait of a violent physical assault motivated by pure bitter spite. Harrison called his star witness to the stand. Madison walked down the central aisle with slow, agonizing steps, ensuring every person in the room absorbed her fragile state. She wore a simple, high-collared black dress that hung loosely on her frame. Her face was pale, completely stripped of her usual heavy makeup, with dark, bruised shadows meticulously applied beneath her eyes. She stepped into the polished wooden witness box and immediately clutched a crumpled white tissue in her trembling hands. She swore an oath to tell the truth, a concept she had never grasped in her life. Harrison began his direct examination with soft, coaxing questions, treating her like a delicate glass doll. He asked her to recount the terrifying events at the hospital stairwell, giving her the perfect platform to launch her devastating theatrical performance. Madison did not just testify. She weaponized her tears. She looked directly at the jury box, her voice breaking with manufactured trauma. She claimed that I had cornered her in the corridor, demanding she leave Carter. She testified that my jealousy was a living, breathing monster. Stella could never give Carter the family he so desperately craved. Madison sobbed, dabbing her dry eyes with the tissue. She hated me for carrying his miracle. She looked right at my stomach, told me I did not deserve to be a mother, and she pushed me. She pushed me down the stairs to kill the only thing Carter truly loved. She wept loudly, her shoulders shaking violently. The psychological warfare was highly effective. I watched the jury panel, closely observing the subtle shifts in their body language. Several members of the panel physically recoiled, glaring at me with absolute disgust. 2 older women in the front row actually wiped tears from their own cheeks, utterly convinced by the display of maternal heartbreak. The courtroom collectively held its breath, completely captivated by the tragic tale of a young innocent mother violently robbed of her unborn child by a bitter, barren ex-wife. Harrison deliberately let the heavy silence stretch, maximizing the emotional devastation, before finally turning to the judge. He stated he had no further questions and took his seat, shooting a smug, victorious glare in my direction. He thought the trap was perfectly laid and securely sprung. The judge turned his attention to my defense table, formally instructing my attorney Marcus to begin his cross-examination. Marcus stood up slowly, radiating absolute calm. He buttoned his suit jacket with deliberate precision and walked confidently toward the center of the courtroom. The jury visibly braced themselves for a brutal, insensitive interrogation. Madison gripped her crumpled tissue tighter, preparing to unleash her defensive tears. Marcus stopped halfway to the podium. He looked directly at Madison, then turned and looked up at the judge. "Your Honor, the defense declines to cross-examine this witness," Marcus stated in a clear, ringing voice. A collective gasp swept through the packed gallery. Carter's head snapped up instantly, his carefully constructed conservative facade cracking to reveal sheer, unadulterated confusion. Harrison bolted upright in his leather chair, immediately suspicious of the highly unorthodox legal maneuver. Madison blinked rapidly, her manufactured tears instantly drying up as she stared blindly at Marcus. Declining to cross-examine a star witness in a massive wrongful death lawsuit was practically legal suicide. It explicitly signaled to the jury that the defense could not dispute the devastating testimony they had just heard. The judge furrowed his heavy brow, leaning intensely over the elevated wooden bench. "Are you absolutely certain, counselor?" the judge asked loudly, giving Marcus a final critical chance to reconsider his dangerous strategy. "I am absolutely certain, Your Honor," Marcus replied, his voice echoing with lethal confidence. "We have no questions for a woman who has never been pregnant a single day in her life. We will, however, call our first expert witness to the stand. I call David Thorne, medical fraud investigator, to testify." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. David strode down the center aisle. He did not look at Carter. He did not look at Madison. He carried a massive sealed cardboard box wrapped in red evidence tape. He walked directly to the witness stand, carrying the subpoenaed, unredacted medical records from every clinic Madison had ever visited. Oxygen vanished from the room. David set the heavy cardboard box on the railing of the witness stand. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the courtroom caught the bright red evidence tape securing the lid. He requested permission from the judge to break the seal. The judge nodded, leaning forward. David withdrew a utility knife and sliced through the thick red adhesive. The sound of the tearing tape echoed sharply across the utterly silent room. Carter sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table. The grieving father act melted off his face, replaced by a frantic mask of sheer panic. He stared at the box. Madison remained seated directly behind Carter. Her hands gripped the wooden pew in front of her. Her knuckles were bone white. She was no longer clutching her prop tissue. Marcus approached the podium. He asked David to state his name and professional credentials for the official court record. David spoke clearly into the microphone. He detailed his 15 years of experience auditing high-level medical insurance claims and investigating coordinated healthcare fraud for federal agencies. Marcus then directed David to extract the primary file from the sealed box. David pulled out a stack of medical charts encased in clear plastic. He activated the document camera positioned next to the witness chair. The large projector screen mounted behind the judge flickered to life. A bright light illuminated a medical document bearing a blue certification stamp. Marcus asked David to identify the projected document. David adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the jury box. "This is an authentic, unalterable surgical record obtained under a federal subpoena," David explained. "It originates from the secure archives of the Pacific Women's Surgical Center in Los Angeles. It is independent of the Boston medical networks associated with the current claims." Marcus asked David to direct the jury to the date of the recorded procedure. David pointed a laser indicator at the top right corner of the projected page. "The date of this procedure is August 14th, exactly 6 years ago," David stated smoothly. "The patient was 24 years old at the time. The name on the file is Madison Avery." David moved the laser dot down the page to a paragraph filled with complex medical terminology. Marcus asked him to translate the clinical jargon into plain English. The document details a bilateral salpingectomy, David read aloud, his voice steady and clinical. In layman terms, the patient elected to undergo a voluntary permanent sterilization procedure. Both fallopian tubes were surgically severed, removed from the abdomen, and the entry points were sealed using cauterization. David paused, letting the clinical words hang over the stunned jury. Marcus walked slowly toward the jury box, his eyes locked on the panel. "Can a woman who has undergone this procedure conceive a child naturally?" Marcus asked. David shook his head firmly. "It is biologically impossible," David answered without hesitation. "Without fallopian tubes, an egg can never travel from the ovaries to the uterus. Natural conception cannot occur under any circumstances. Therefore, the pregnancy claimed in this lawsuit could never have existed." Carter leaped out of his chair. He slammed his hands flat onto the plaintiff's table. "Objection!" His new attorney, Vance Harrison, screamed, scrambling to his feet a second later. "This is incredibly prejudicial and completely fabricated." The judge slammed his gavel down with a deafening crack. "Overruled," the judge roared. "Sit down immediately, counselor." Carter slowly sank back into his leather chair. He slowly turned his head to look at Madison. His face was twisted in a grotesque mixture of horror, revulsion, and dawning realization. The grief he had been projecting was entirely replaced by pure venomous rage. Marcus turned his attention back to David. He instructed the investigator to pull the next file from the sealed box. David placed a second document onto the projector. This was the billing ledger and the ultrasound image Madison had submitted as core evidence for the $3 million emotional distress claim. David pointed to the serial numbers printed along the bottom edge of the black and white ultrasound photo. "This ultrasound was not taken during a prenatal exam," David testified, his voice cutting through the thick tension in the room. "By tracking the serial numbers through the manufacturer's database, we verified that this specific image was generated by a demonstration machine at a medical supply convention 3 years ago. It is a stock image. Furthermore, the billing records submitted by the plaintiff show consultations for prenatal vitamins and morning sickness treatments. These records were digitally altered. We have the original unedited digital footprint showing the exact timestamps when these fake entries were created. The entire pregnancy, the detailed ultrasound, and the tragic miscarriage were meticulously criminally fabricated." The courtroom absolutely erupted. A massive unified gasp ripped through the packed gallery. The financial reporters in the back rows furiously began typing on their devices, instantly broadcasting the catastrophic implosion of Carter's lawsuit. The jurors stared at Madison with expressions of pure disgust. The two older women in the front row, who had been weeping in sympathy just 10 minutes earlier, now looked visibly sickened by the profound deception. Madison realized the trap had closed permanently around her. Her entire fraudulent empire was laid bare on a massive screen for the federal court, her wealthy victim, and the press to witness. She shot out of her pew, her high-collared black dress swirling around her legs. She did not look at Carter. She did not look at the judge. She turned her back on the entire courtroom and lunged frantically up the central aisle toward the exit. She was sprinting, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. She reached the back of the gallery, extending her hands to push open the exit. Two large, uniformed bailiffs immediately stepped out from the shadows. They moved with absolute precision, crossing their arms and physically blocking the heavy wooden doors. Madison slammed into their solid frames and stumbled backward, completely trapped inside the room she had planned to conquer. The heavy doors shuddered as Madison threw her weight against them, but the bailiffs did not budge. They gripped her arms, turning her back. The gallery erupted in shouts. The judge struck his gavel until the room shocked itself into silence. He ordered Madison back to the table. She stumbled down the aisle, collapsing into her chair. She refused to look at Carter, who stared blindly ahead. Harrison, sweating through his bespoke suit, tried to salvage the wreckage. He requested a recess. The judge denied the motion. The medical fraud eviscerated the wrongful death claim, but the financial distress claims remained active. Marcus seized the hesitation. He formally called me to the witness stand to address the plaintiff's demand for $3 million. I walked to the front of the courtroom. My heels clicked. I took the formal oath, sat down, and carefully adjusted the microphone. I looked directly at Carter. The terror radiating from his posture was palpable. He knew I dealt exclusively in numbers, and numbers never lied. Marcus asked permission to present my forensic findings regarding the financial damages. Harrison jumped up, shouting objections. The judge silenced him with a sharp wave, noting Carter explicitly opened his financial history to scrutiny the moment he demanded $3 million. The judge granted me full control of the document camera. I placed my spreadsheet onto the glass. The projector displayed a complex web of corporate routing numbers and wire transfers. The jury leaned forward, captivated by the dramatic shift to high-stakes corporate finance. Mr. Carter claims my actions caused him $3 million in financial ruin. I began, my voice projecting clearly. However, forensic analysis of his firm's internal ledgers tells a completely different story. Carter is not seeking compensation for a tragedy. He is desperately attempting to plug a catastrophic illegal deficit in his own corporate accounts. I switched the slide. A new document appeared highlighting a massive withdrawal. I traced the footprint using a red laser pointer. 3 years ago, Carter's firm secured a lucrative contract to manage the state public school teachers' pension fund, I explained. It was a massive influx of capital. But instead of managing those funds ethically, Carter used them as his personal piggy bank. He initiated unauthorized shadow investments in commercial real estate to cover his failing gambles. Carter gripped the edges of the plaintiff's table. His knuckles were bone white. He opened his mouth to formally object, but his throat seized. Harrison looked at his client, his face draining of color as he realized the staggering magnitude of the federal crimes he was sitting next to. When the shadow investments collapsed, Carter was left with a massive shortfall. I continued. I placed a final official bank statement directly on the illuminated projector. It showed a devastating negative balance highlighted in bright red ink. The exact amount missing from the teacher's pension fund is $2,998,400. Let us round that up to $3 million. I looked directly at the jury box. The faces of the men and women were hard like granite, their previous sympathy entirely replaced by cold, furious judgment. Several jurors glared at Carter with absolute unconcealed disgust. Carter did not file this lawsuit because he was a grieving father, I stated. It was a subpoenaed audit demand from the State Oversight Committee. He filed this lawsuit because the State Pension Board scheduled a mandatory audit of his firm for next month. If he does not replace the stolen $3 million before the auditors arrive, the federal government will indict him for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of state pension funds. He needed a quick payout and decided to use a fabricated pregnancy to extort that exact amount directly from my personal bank accounts. The silence was absolute. The sheer scale of the deception hung in the air, suffocating. Carter was not just a manipulative liar. He was a financial predator who had stolen the retirement savings of thousands of hardworking teachers, then tried to use the court system to rob his ex-wife to cover his tracks. I turned my gaze back to Carter. He was shaking violently in his chair. The carefully cultivated illusion of the successful financial manager was incinerated in front of the entire city. He was a broke, desperate thief cornered by his own staggering hubris. "You have no money left, Carter," I said softly. "You have no firm. You have no leverage. You are nothing but a common thief in a very expensive suit." Something inside Carter finally snapped. The overwhelming humiliation, the total public exposure, and the terrifying reality of federal prison collided in his brain. He let out a raw, animalistic scream that tore through the courtroom. He vaulted wildly over the heavy wooden plaintiff's table, violently knocking a heavy glass water pitcher shattering to the floor. He lunged directly toward the witness stand, his hands outstretched like claws, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged violence. He did not make it past the center podium. 3 heavily armed court bailiffs tackled him simultaneously from the side. They slammed his body face first into the solid hardwood floor. The sickening sound of his jaw striking the wood echoed sharply. They pinned his arms forcefully behind his back, snapping heavy steel handcuffs over his wrists. Carter thrashed blindly against the floor, screaming incoherent threats, his expensive suit jacket tearing violently at the shoulder seam. The judge did not hesitate. He stood up, towering aggressively over the chaotic scene below his bench. He struck his heavy gavel repeatedly until the room quieted just enough for his voice to be heard. "This civil case is dismissed with prejudice in its entirety," the judge roared, his face flushed with absolute judicial fury. He looked down at Carter in disgust. Then the judge looked up and nodded sharply, signaling directly to the heavy double doors at the back of the room. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the gallery swung open with a resounding crash. 4 men in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI marched down the center aisle in perfect unison. Their heavy boots struck the polished hardwood floor like a rhythmic drumbeat of absolute doom. The lead agent bypassed the spectator pews and walked directly to the tangled heap on the floor where the court bailiffs still pinned a thrashing Carter. The agent flashed a gold badge toward the bench. The judge gave a single firm nod of approval. The bailiff stepped back, hauling Carter up by his armpits. He looked like a feral animal caught in a snare. The federal agent stepped into Carter's personal space and produced heavy steel handcuffs. "Carter Winston, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and the systematic embezzlement of the state public school teachers' pension fund," the agent announced. His voice was cold, echoing across the room. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Carter twisted violently in the agent's grip. He glared wildly around the room, his eyes darting from the judge to Harrison and finally landing on me. He opened his mouth to scream another threat, but a second agent shoved him forcefully toward the exit. The fight drained from his body instantly. His shoulders slumped, his knees buckled slightly, and the agents had to physically drag his dead weight down the aisle. The golden boy of corporate finance was reduced to a sniveling, broken criminal being hauled away in chains. At the plaintiff table, Madison sat paralyzed. She watched Carter disappear through the doors. She slowly turned her head. Instead, she found herself face to face with a tall woman in a sharp gray suit, holding a leather folder. The woman pulled a badge from her jacket pocket. "Detective Sarah Higgins, Boston Police Department," the woman stated clearly. "Madison Avery, stand up and place your hands behind your back." Madison recoiled, for what she shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, panicked pitch. "I am the victim here." Detective Higgins did not blink. She reached down, grabbed Madison by the bicep, and hauled her to her feet with zero hesitation. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of perjury, felony medical fraud, and elder financial abuse," Higgins read from her notepad. "We have the bank records showing you systematically drained your mother Diana's retirement accounts to fund your fraudulent lifestyle and pay for black market medical documents." The handcuffs clicked shut around Madison's slender wrists with a sharp metallic snap. Madison thrashed against the detective's grip, twisting her body frantically toward the spectator section. She scanned the crowd with wide, terrified eyes until she found her target. Diana sat in the second row, her face drained of all color, her hands covering her mouth in sheer horror. "Mom, do something," Madison screamed. Her voice tore through the room, desperate and shrill. "Call a lawyer. Tell them I did not do it. Tell them it was Carter's idea. Help me." Diana remained entirely frozen in her seat. She stared at Madison, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, betrayal, and absolute devastation. The revelation of the elder financial abuse had struck her like a physical blow. The daughter she had worshipped, the child she had funded and protected at my expense, had secretly stolen her life savings to finance a criminal conspiracy. "Mom, please," Madison sobbed loudly, dragging her feet as the detective pulled her toward the aisle. "Do not let them take me. I am your daughter. You have to save me." Diana slowly lowered her hands from her face. She looked at Madison. She saw the greed, the manipulation, and the profound selfishness that she had enabled for 3 decades. Diana did not stand up. She did not call out to the detective. She simply turned her head away, breaking eye contact with her screaming daughter. Madison wailed in genuine terror as the detective marched her out of the courtroom, her cries echoing down the marble hallway until the heavy doors swung shut. I watched the entire spectacle from the witness stand, feeling a profound sense of closure. The toxic empire they had built on lies and stolen money was completely incinerated. I stepped down from the podium and walked calmly past the empty plaintiff table, leaving the shattered remnants of Carter's legal team behind me. Through the glass doors, I saw Diana stumbling down the wide concrete steps of the federal courthouse. She looked frail, leaning heavily on the brass handrail. She reached the bottom of the steps and paused on the sidewalk, pulling her designer coat tightly around her shoulders against the brisk afternoon wind. A man in a plain dark suit detached himself from the shadows near a parked sedan. He approached Diana with purposeful strides. He held a thick manila envelope in his right hand. Diana looked up at him, her eyes vacant and defeated. She automatically extended her hand. The man did not shake her hand. He pressed the thick envelope directly into her palm. Diana Winston, I am Special Agent Miller with the Internal Revenue Service. The man announced, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet plaza. This is your formal notification of asset forfeiture. As of this morning, due to unpaid federal taxes and your complicity in harboring embezzled funds, your foreclosed estate on Beacon Hill has been officially seized by the United States government. You are barred from entering the premises. Diana dropped the manila envelope. It hit the cold concrete with a surprisingly dull, heavy slap. She stared blindly at the crisp white paper resting on the dirty gray pavement. Her home, her social status, her wealth, and her beloved golden child were all completely gone forever. She had absolutely nothing left but the expensive wool coat on her back. I stood quietly inside the glass doors, watching her world finally collapse into dust. The heavy mahogany front doors of the Beacon Hill estate stood wide open, propped back by heavy moving dollies. I walked across the threshold, my footsteps echoing sharply against the imported Italian marble foyer. Grace walked to my left, her posture radiating absolute professional triumph, while David flanked my right, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene of dismantling wealth. The federal seizure order had been executed with ruthless bureaucratic efficiency. A crew of uniformed movers systematically stripped the mansion of its opulence. They carried out priceless antique sideboards, rolled up hand-woven Persian rugs, and carefully crated the massive crystal chandeliers that had once illuminated the grand entryway. The house felt entirely different now. Stripped of its expensive armor, it was just an empty, cavernous shell of drywall and echoing corridors. The illusion of impenetrable superiority was gone, boxed up and loaded into the back of a waiting government freight truck. I walked deeper into the house, passing the formal dining room, where I had endured years of thinly veiled insults and condescension. The long mahogany table was gone. The silk drapes were pulled down, letting the harsh afternoon sunlight expose the scuff marks and dust on the bare hardwood floors. We turned the corner into the sunken formal living room. This space had always been the absolute epicenter of social power, the room where the family held court and passed judgment on anyone they deemed unworthy of their elevated status. Now it was utterly desolate. The velvet sofas, the grand piano, and the curated art collection had all vanished. In the exact center of the vast, empty room sat Diana. She was positioned directly on the bare wooden floor, her legs tucked beneath her. A single battered cardboard box rested beside her knee. It contained the few personal items the federal agents had permitted her to keep. The physical transformation was staggering. The formidable, flawlessly manicured matriarch, who had commanded absolute obedience from everyone in her orbit, had completely evaporated. She wore the same designer wool coat from the courthouse plaza, but it now looked too large, hanging loosely off her slumped shoulders. Her posture was completely broken. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, hung in limp, unkempt strands around her pale face. She looked like a hollow, fragile ghost haunting the ruins of her own demolished empire. Hearing our approaching footsteps, Diana slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen, and completely devoid of their former sharp arrogance. She looked at Grace, then at David, and finally locked her gaze onto me. A tremor ran through her thin frame. She did not attempt to stand up to greet us. Her hands gripped the edges of her designer coat, pulling it tighter around her chest, as if trying to shield herself from the freezing reality of her situation. "Stella," she whispered, her voice cracking, sounding frail and impossibly weak. I stopped 10 feet away from her, maintaining a deliberate, calculated physical distance. I did not speak. I simply let the crushing weight of the silent, empty room press down on her shoulders. Diana swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically around the stripped walls before returning to my face. "The bank froze all my personal accounts," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "The government seized the trust funds. Madison drained the emergency reserves before she was arrested. I have absolutely nothing left. My credit cards are declining. My friends will not answer my phone calls. I have nowhere to go." The pathetic display of vulnerability was entirely foreign. This was the woman who had orchestrated my psychological destruction, the woman who had financed the campaign to replace me with her perfect golden child. "Please, Stella." Diana begged, tears spilling over her eyelashes and cutting through the remaining traces of her expensive foundation. "I know we had our differences. I know I was harsh with you. But you must understand my position. I was completely blinded by my love for Madison's late father. On his deathbed, I promised him I would protect our daughter at all costs. I promised him I would secure her future. I let that promise twist my judgment. I let it convince me that the ends justified the means. I am so deeply sorry for everything I allowed them to do to you. I am a desperate, foolish old woman. Please, I am begging you. Let me stay in your guest house. Just for a few weeks until I can contact my lawyers. Just until I figure out a plan. You have a good heart. You cannot leave me on the street." I stared down at her, analyzing the desperate performance. She was not apologizing for her cruelty. She was apologizing because she had lost the game and had run out of resources. She was still trying to manipulate my empathy, weaponizing the memory of a dead husband to excuse decades of systematic malice. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice or offer a single tear of sympathy. The profound anger that had fueled my survival for the past 2 years had burned away, leaving behind only a cold, impenetrable sheet of ice. "You enabled a monster, Diana," I stated, my voice echoing clinically against the bare walls. "You funded her lies, you covered her tracks, and you watched her try to destroy my life without a single ounce of hesitation. You did not protect your daughter. You fed her greed until she turned around and devoured you." I unclasped the brass hardware on my leather handbag. I reached inside, bypassing my phone and keys, and closed my fingers around a single piece of paper currency. I pulled it out, stepped forward, and opened my hand. The crisp green bill fluttered through the quiet air, drifting slowly downward until it landed gently directly in Diana's lap. "Buy yourself a hot cup of coffee," I said quietly, turning my back on her forever, and walking out of the ruined mansion into the bright afternoon. Diana lowered her tear-streaked face, her trembling eyes locking onto the crisp green paper resting delicately on her knees. It was not just any piece of currency. It was a $50 bill. It was the exact same $50 bill Madison had smugly slid across the polished mahogany table during my initial divorce mediation. On that day, Madison had flipped it toward me like a discarded piece of trash, mocking my financial independence, sneering that I would need it for cab fare once Carter took everything I owned. I had picked up that bill. I had folded it into a tight, sharp square. I had carried it inside my wallet every single day since that mediation. It had been my silent fuel, a daily, tangible reminder of the profound disrespect and burning humiliation they had orchestrated against me. Now the cycle was completely reversed. The physical embodiment of their arrogance was sitting in the lap of a woman who had just lost a multi-million-dollar empire. The poetry of the moment was absolute. Diana stared at the portrait of Ulysses S. Grant, her mind slowly connecting the horrific full-circle reality of her absolute, unmitigated defeat. The silence in the grand, empty room stretched into a suffocating eternity. Dust motes danced in the harsh beams of sunlight piercing through the bare windows. Diana raised her hands, her manicured fingers hovering over the $50 bill as if it were radioactive. She knew exactly what that specific bill meant. She had been sitting right next to Madison during that mediation, laughing behind her hand, perfectly complicit in the attempt to leave me entirely destitute. She had cheered for my destruction. She had financed the war against me. Now she was the one sitting on a cold, bare floor, with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and a single cardboard box containing a few pathetic remnants of a stolen life. The sheer gravity of her fall crushed whatever remained of her manufactured pride. Her shoulders curled inward, her spine bowing under the unbearable weight of consequence. The grand matriarch of Boston high society, the woman who had demanded total submission from her entire bloodline, was reduced to staring at a single piece of paper money, utterly paralyzed by the staggering, terrifying realization that her reign of terror was permanently, irreversibly finished. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only a clean, surgical finality. "Go buy yourself a bus ticket," I said softly. My voice did not echo, but it cut through the vast room with lethal precision. It was not a shout. It was a simple, factual directive delivered with the cold authority of a judge handing down a final, unappealable sentence. Grace stepped forward, positioning herself firmly at my left shoulder. David moved in perfect synchronization, planting his feet solidly at my right. We stood together as a united, unbreakable wall. There was no hesitation in our posture, no pity in our eyes. They had walked through fire with me, uncovering the fraud, dismantling the lies, and watching my family try to destroy me for sport. They were my true family now. We formed a barrier of absolute loyalty that Diana could never breach, a fortress built on mutual respect and hard truth, rather than manipulation and conditional love. Diana looked up at the three of us, searching for a single fraction of weakness, a single crack in our armor. She found absolutely nothing. The last remaining shred of Diana's delusion shattered. The reality of her profound isolation crashed down upon her. She was completely alone. Carter was sitting in a federal holding cell facing decades of incarceration for massive corporate embezzlement. Madison was being processed through the county jail, stripped of her designer clothes and facing multiple felony fraud charges. The sprawling Beacon Hill mansion was seized by the federal government, its lavish contents boxed up and hauled away by indifferent workers. Her social circle had evaporated the second the arrest warrants hit the local news. Every bridge she had ever built was burned to ash by her own toxic greed. Diana closed her eyes, squeezing them shut, as if trying to wake up from a horrific nightmare. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, a wretched guttural sob ripped through her throat. She snatched the $50 bill from her lap, crushing it in her fist, and buried her face deeply into her hands. Her thin shoulders shook violently. She wept loudly into the cavernous, empty room, her cries bouncing off the bare drywall, returning to her as a hollow, mocking echo of her own absolute misery. I did not linger to watch her. I had already given her too many years of my life, too much energy, and far too much of my peace. I turned my back on the woman who birthed me, severing the final toxic thread that tied me to her dark legacy. Grace and David pivoted smoothly alongside me, our footsteps syncing perfectly as we walked away from the weeping figure on the floor. We marched down the long, empty hallway, our shoes clicking sharply against the imported marble tiles that now belonged to the federal government. We reached the grand entryway, stepping past the federal agents cataloging the last few seized assets. I walked through the massive doorframe and stepped out onto the wide stone porch. The crisp, bright American sunlight hit my face, instantly warm and brilliantly clear. The air tasted incredibly fresh, entirely devoid of the suffocating heavy perfume and bitter lies that had always permeated that house. I walked slowly down the curved concrete steps, feeling a profound, unshakable lightness expanding within my chest. Behind me, the federal agents grabbed the heavy brass handles, The massive oak doors slammed shut with a deafening, thunderous boom, sealing the house, the betrayal, and the past away forever. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind me, sealing the past away forever. Tonight that sound was replaced by a much more pleasant resonance, crystal chiming against crystal. I raised my flute of champagne, catching the ambient light of the steakhouse. The room buzzed with the hum of Boston's elite. We sat at a secluded corner booth surrounded by mahogany paneling and the scent of dry, aged beef. Grace sat to my left, her sharp features softened by a smile. David sat to my right, leaning back with absolute satisfaction. To the future, I said, my voice steady. To truth, to loyalty, and to the launch of Vanguard Forensic Accounting. Grace tapped her glass against mine. To Vanguard, she echoed, and to the fastest firm expansion this city has seen in a decade. David completed the triangle. I will drink to that. We took down a criminal empire, and now we get paid top dollar to hunt the rest of them. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. The ashes of Carter's fraudulent empire provided fertilizer for my new venture. Grace left her old firm to become my senior partner. David signed on as our lead researcher. We were thriving, commanding premium retainers from elite clients who wanted their books sanitized or their embezzling partners exposed. The skills I honed hunting Carter's hidden assets were now generating massive wealth. Grace set her glass down. I received a call from the district attorney this morning, she mentioned casually. They finalized the sentencing recommendations for the Winston case. I sliced a piece of steak, keeping my movements deliberate. Tell me everything. Carter is looking at 20 years in federal prison, Grace reported. The judge denied his motion for a downward departure. His lawyers tried to argue he was manipulated, but the paper trail you handed over was bulletproof. The wire fraud carries a decade, and the embezzlement from the pension funds sealed his fate. He will be an old broken man when he sees the outside of a cell block. David chuckled. He thought his charm would save him. I heard he tried to negotiate a country club prison. The judge laughed him out of the room. He is going to a maximum security facility in upstate New York. Carter had built his identity on the illusion of superiority. Stripped of his tailored suits and stolen millions, he was finally facing the reality of his own mediocrity. And Madison, I asked, taking another sip of champagne. Grace shook her head. Her legal strategy collapsed. Her defense attorney tried to secure a plea deal by offering to testify against Carter, but she had nothing to offer that we had not already provided. The prosecutor rejected the deal outright. She is facing trial next month on multiple counts of perjury, medical fraud, and financial abuse. They are pushing for 15 years. She played a dangerous game, David added. She thought she could outsmart everyone. Now she is sitting in county jail, learning that a forged medical document does not buy a free pass. I leaned back, looking at my two loyal friends. Have either of you heard anything about Diana? David nodded slowly. I ran a background check on her last week to tie up loose ends. The federal government seized absolutely everything. The Beacon Hill estate, the offshore accounts, the luxury vehicles. Every asset tied to Carter's fraudulent network was liquidated to pay back the pension fund. Where is she? I asked. She is living in a tiny subsidized apartment across the state, David replied quietly. She has no car, no credit, and no social standing. The women she used to invite to her charity galas pretend they do not know her name. She spends her days sitting by a window, overlooking an empty parking lot, living off a meager allowance. The queen of Boston society is completely dethroned. Diana had sacrificed her morals and her own flesh and blood to protect a lifestyle built on lies. Her blind devotion to Madison's greed left her with absolutely nothing. The poetic justice of her living out her final years in a cramped, subsidized apartment was the ultimate closing chapter to her reign. The waiter approached our table, discreetly placing a leather billfold near my elbow. "Can I get you anything else this evening?" he asked politely. "We are perfect, thank you," I replied. I opened my designer handbag. I slid out a heavy, matte black corporate card bearing the name Vanguard Forensic Accounting. I placed it on the silver tray. The waiter walked away. I looked at Grace and David, raising my glass one final time. We survived the fire, I said softly. And we built an empire from the smoke. Grace finished clinking her glass against mine. We paid the bill and walked out of the restaurant. The warm summer night wrapped around us as we stepped onto the bustling city sidewalk. Grace and David hugged me tightly, promising to see me at the office bright and early on Monday morning. I watched them walk away, feeling gratitude for their unwavering loyalty. I turned and walked toward the valet stand. The attendant smiled warmly, handing me a set of keys. "Right this way," he said, gesturing to the curb. Resting under the glow of the streetlights was my brand new sleek midnight blue sports car. Its aerodynamic lines and aggressive stance screamed power and absolute control. It was the physical manifestation of my success, a reward for surviving the darkest period of my life. I tipped the valet and walked to the driver's side. I opened the door, inhaling the rich scent of fresh leather. I slid into the driver's seat, feeling it mold perfectly to my body. I gripped the thick leather steering wheel, my hands steady. I pressed the ignition button and the engine roared to life with a deep growl. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was unrecognizable from the terrified wife who had sat in that divorce mediation a year ago. Her eyes were bright, fierce, and entirely unafraid. I smiled, a genuine expression of pure joy. I shifted the car into drive. I hit the gas pedal, feeling the immediate thrilling surge of acceleration press me back into the seat. I merged seamlessly onto the open highway, leaving the city lights behind me in a brilliant blur. The dark road stretched out ahead, wide open and full of possibilities. I drove faster, speeding down the highway, completely free, totally victorious, and ready for whatever comes next. The narratives presented share a striking unifying theme that resonates deeply with anyone who has navigated complex family dynamics: the painful but liberating realization that blood relation does not automatically equate to unconditional love or loyalty. In each story, whether it involves a stolen inheritance, an abandoned teenager at an airport, or a mother dismissing her daughter's achievements, the protagonist is forced to confront a devastating truth. The people biologically expected to protect, nurture, and champion them are instead the architects of their deepest pain. This shatters the societal myth that family is an inherently supportive unit, revealing that toxic dynamics often thrive hidden behind the facade of suburban perfection or high society prestige. The core lesson learned is that enduring familial abuse is not a requirement for being a good person. For years, the protagonists accepted their roles as scapegoats. They internalized the constant criticism, the blatant favoritism of golden children, and the systematic erasure of their own accomplishments. They mistakenly believed that if they just worked harder or compromised their boundaries, they would eventually earn the validation they desperately craved. However, the turning point never comes from the abusers suddenly realizing their faults. It comes from the victim recognizing their own inherent worth. The pivotal moment is an internal awakening where the protagonist decides their peace of mind is more valuable than maintaining a toxic status quo. Establishing boundaries or choosing to walk away entirely is depicted not as an act of cruelty or petty revenge, but as a profound act of self-preservation. When the protagonists finally step away from the manipulation, whether by quietly securing their own assets, walking out of a disastrous family gathering, or legally severing ties, they reclaim their power. They learn that true security is never derived from pleasing those who are determined to misunderstand them. Instead, genuine happiness is self-generated. By removing the draining noise of familial judgment, these women create the emotional space required to build authentic lives. They channel their pain into ambition, transforming past traumas into the fuel that powers their independent successes. Furthermore, these stories highlight the beautiful reality of chosen families. When the biological safety net fails, new networks of support inevitably emerge. True family is found in the mentors who see your potential, the friends who offer unwavering support, and the partners who stand by your side during your darkest moments. These chosen bonds are forged in mutual respect and genuine care, proving that love is defined by actions and consistency, not just DNA. The ultimate victory is not just surviving the initial betrayal, but actively thriving in a positive environment you have consciously built for yourself. Ultimately, the most powerful lesson is that you hold the pen to your own life's story. You are not obligated to play a supporting role in someone else's toxic narrative. By bravely walking away from those who diminish your light, you make room for the people and passions that allow you to shine brightly. It takes immense courage to redefine what family means, but the resulting freedom is entirely worth the struggle. If you have ever had to set difficult boundaries to protect your own peace, please share your story in the comments below.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.